Hi everyone. For those who don't know me, I'm Danny Hill. I'm the Assistant Secretary of the Ambulance Union. A topic that has been quite contentious recently is what defines reasonable or unreasonable overtime for people working in non-emergency patient transport. And if you're on our Facebook page, there's been quite a few discussions about that recently. One of the questions we get asked a lot is what's the time? How much is reasonable? What's unreasonable? The truth is there isn't a definition anywhere in any Australian legislation or case law that defines what is a reasonable amount of time, as in whether 10 minutes is reasonable and 20 minutes is unreasonable. You won't find it anywhere. And many unions have run many cases in the industrial courts many times, and there's never been a definition given of what is reasonable or unreasonable overtime. In some ways that's a good thing, because let's say an hour was deemed to be reasonable, that was the time given that's reasonable is 1 hour, well then it would be reasonable for the employer to work you an hour overtime almost every shift, and we wouldn't want that to happen. So there was a major test case many years ago, about 15 years ago, run by the ACTU to try to find a definition of what is reasonable or unreasonable overtime. What came out of that was a set of recommendations of what needs to be taken into consideration when determining what is reasonable and unreasonable. Now, those recommendations form the basis of clauses that we negotiate in enterprise agreements, that all unions try to get into enterprise agreements. So for those of you who work for National Patient Transport or the Royal Flying Doctor Service, you're under an enterprise agreement. The union has negotiated an agreement between your employer and us and you, the employees of that company, that the company has agreed to, that allows you to refuse to work unreasonable overtime. And that word is really important, refuse. That doesn't mean you ring up and ask, can I please not work overtime? It means you have the right, and your employer has agreed to give you the right to refuse to work unreasonable overtime. So if you work for NPT, it's clause 24E, that gives a definition of what is reasonable or unreasonable overtime, and for RFES employees, it's clause 26. Now, to give you an example, there's a list of things that need to be taken into consideration. So in the NPT agreement, it's any risk to employees' health and safety, the employee's personal circumstances, including family responsibilities, the need of the workplace or enterprise, the notice given by the employer of the overtime and by the employee of the intention to refuse the overtime, and any other relevant matter. There are several other components in the RFDS clause as well, which include the nature of the employee's role and several other clauses. But it's really important for those of you covered by these agreements that you learn those clauses, that you're armed with them, print them up, have them in the truck with you, and you learn to use them. So to give you an example, let's say you're half an hour before the end of your shift, but you need to pick up your child from childcare half an hour after you finish. So therefore, for you, it's unreasonable for you to work even 5 minutes overtime because you need to pick up your child. So what you would do in that circumstance is you would call the duty manager and call your employer, and you should call both, and say to your employer, tonight I'm unable to work overtime, and I'll be refusing to work any overtime because I have to pick up my child. Now in that circumstance, it would be unreasonable for the employer to punish you or to give you any warnings or to threaten you or to refuse to allow you to finish on time. And again, what you're saying is that you refuse, and you refer them to those clauses that I've just read out to you. Conversely, let's say it's in the unlikely event of a major catastrophe, and there's a train accident around the corner from where you are, and the dispatcher says, we need you to go to this case, and yes, it's going to take you overtime. It's a priority 0 case, a major disaster, and it's not that you have a personal circumstance that prohibits you from working overtime, you just don't want to. It would be unreasonable for you to refuse to work that period of overtime. So it's very much a judgment call, and this is something that these same clauses are in the Ambulance Victoria Enterprise Agreement, and for a paramedic, it would be unreasonable for the paramedic to refuse a priority 0 if they just want to get home in time for dinner. that would be unreasonable. However, if they're given a code 3 towards the end of their shift that's going to take them half an hour over and they can't go home and pick up their child, they then have a reasonable reason for getting off on time and a reasonable reason for refusing that case. What would happen in that circumstance is if you refused, as long as you've got a reason that's in the agreement and you refuse to do that job, that's what you do. You say, I'm not doing that job, I refuse to do it, and you do that politely. You go back to your branch, you log off, you put the keys away, and you go home. And then the following day, if you're called into a meeting or if your employer wants to talk to you about it and you're threatened with any form of punishment, we would take that to the Fair Work Commission because the company would be in breach of the enterprise agreement that they have agreed to. So it's really important that you remember that your employer has agreed to the clauses that are in these agreements. Now, this is all well and good for people who work at NPT and RFDS where we have good enterprise agreements, but for those of you who work at Wilson's Medic 1 or at St John Ambulance, this is why it is so important that we try to get an enterprise agreement at your workplace that your employer and the union and you agree to, so that we can better protect you and you have those protections in place. Just one other thing, a lot of people think that it's reasonable to say, my shift was 9 to 5 and therefore, I don't want to work overtime. I'm paid from 9 to 5. I choose not to work overtime. That is not in the agreement. That is not in the enterprise agreements. So you need to use these clauses. You need to have and be armed with your reason that needs to be honest and truthful, and say, I have a personal circumstance, like I have to pick up my child, or I am fatigued, and therefore that is a health and safety issue that prevents me from doing that extra job, and I'm refusing to do that job. So the wash-up of it is, print up those clauses, have them in the truck with you, and learn to use them and be confident using them. And if you need support from us, you can come to us, but that is the way we're going to try to change the industry so that you get off shift on time when you need to. It's a 24-hour industry, and it's realistic to expect that there will be times, and it's in your employment contracts, that from time to time you will need to work some form of overtime. And I think everyone accepts that. But there are facilities within your enterprise agreement that you can use to ensure that when you need to get off on time, you're able to. If you have any questions, you know where to find us. Take care. Talk to you soon.